Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadabhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dandavat Pranam, devotees. I first and foremost would like to beg that devotees please understand that I'm going to address a topic and I don't have any personal animosity, or I'm not interested in creating a dichotomy with those who may espouse opposite to the way that I'm going to present what I've understood Srila Prabhupada, and not only myself, I am insignificant, but many stalwart devotees like our Srila Gaura Govinda Swami Maharaj and many other stalwart disciples of Srila Prabhupada and followers have understood Srila Prabhupada in regard to the nature of the Jiva and the fact that the Jivas do not fall from a direct relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world. I'm not going to get into various other theoretical ideas about where Jivas do come from. I have expressed that in other videos, and I've given evidence for that in other videos. So I would also pray that no one gives an assumption to what they think I may feel as far as that's concerned, but just to concentrate on the discussion at hand and the evidence given at hand regarding this issue. I have spoken on this issue before, and if anybody has heard me speak on this forum before, they know that I generally don't like to keep reiterating topics. I particularly reiterated this topic because one devotee attended a class which I heard part of, and the devotee really wanted a response. They really wanted a counter viewpoint to that particular class and what was given as evidence and as logic. Because anytime that you're presenting any Siddhanta, there should be Guru Sadhu Sastra, but in the manner of Sastra, there should be Sastra and Sastra Yukti, which means there should both be the Sastric evidence and there should also be the logic which accompanies that Sastric evidence. So essentially, the premise that was spoken by the person giving the class was that there was actual evidence in Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly 2 verses, which directly describe the fall of the Jiva from the spiritual world. And that in Srimad Bhagavatam, this evidence, then because Bhagavatam is our root praman. Root praman means it is our foundational evidence for everything. Our Srila Jiva Goswami Pad in writing all Sandarbhas, everything, and all of our Goswami Varga in writing any Siddhant, their root reference to vet any Siddhant was Srimad Bhagavatam. So we all mutually agree that Srimad Bhagavatam is the root evidence, the spotless evidence. As Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has spoken, Srimad Bhagavatam Amala Pramanam, that it is Amala Praman, Srimad Bhagavatam. And therefore we all mutually accept that Srimad Bhagavatam is our root evidence for anything we want to present. So the person giving the class presented that the evidence for this fall of the Jiva from the relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world had 2 places of evidence in Srimad Bhagavatam. So I first want to also, before I read the evidence and then go through the Vedic process, which is to present an argument, to present a doubt, to present a Purvapaksh, means a counter argument, and then to present the Siddhant, I want to mention why it is particularly important because there was also indication that those who did not accept this particular view and understanding were not accepting Srila Prabhupada. And this is a very dangerous statement to make because it indicates that among the thousands of followers of Srila Prabhupada, if someone doesn't agree with how you have understood or perceived Srila Prabhupada, they have not accepted Srila Prabhupada. So for one, there is a subtle equation of that person with Srila Prabhupada. That what I've understood is axiomatically to be understood by everyone as directly Srila Prabhupada's understanding. So that's one thing that's problematic because it'll create an obvious confusion where you find other disciples, stalwart disciples, sincere disciples and followers of Srila Prabhupada who don't, by the nature of Guru Sadhana Sastra, see according to what you've espoused. So I think a more viable position to even present what you have understood would be to say, well, this is what I understood Srila Prabhupada to say. And I have lived my life, I have couched my practice in that understanding. And that's fine because everyone is an individual and we have the right to, as long as it's genuinely done in the manner of Guru Sadhu Sastra, that we can come to our conclusion. Now, we may all evolve in that understanding, but at least to the Vaishnav Mandal, we present it from the point of view with some humility, this is what I've understood. But to present that Srila Prabhupada is the backstop or backdrop of my understanding, and they are actually unequivocally one, is, first of all, as I mentioned, dangerous, but two, it's divisive, because it indicates that other disciples and followers are somehow off course because they don't align with your understanding. That's one problem among many. Okay, so let's go to the actual Siddhantic presentation itself. So the person who espoused the idea that we fall from a relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world quoted from two verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, essentially, which he says are absolute proof of this fact. So the first sort of red flag that should arise is out of 18,000 verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, out of unlimited commentary verses on Srimad Bhagavatam, out of 400,000 verses written by our Siddhantic Acharya, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad, no other evidence for this could be found except two verses in Srimad Bhagavatam. So that should be a red flag. Because if something is a genuine Siddhant, you should find redundant support for it throughout Sastra. It won't be that, well, I found two gems that establish my point. It should be something reiterated in Sastra over and over again. Because the nature of the Jiva's genesis in this world is obviously a big issue. So therefore, how would it be that only two verses in all of the 18,000 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam address this? Now let me additionally go now to the actual verses and show how even these two verses are not actually speaking to a historical reality of a jiva falling from the spiritual world in a relationship with Krishna. So let's look at the verses. So the first verse is quoted as Srimad Bhagavatam. I believe the first verse is going to be 52 actually. I have Srimad Bhagavatam 4:28. 53 is the second verse because I put both verses here. No, it is 53, I'm sorry. But I just separated the Sanskrit so I could actually read that out. Because especially he quoted the Sanskrit and the person has studied Sanskrit language. So they were giving indication that these are the meanings of certain words. So, Api smarasi cha atmanam avigyata shakam shake hitva mam. This is the emphasis the person gave. Hitva mam padam anvichan boma bhoga rato gataha. So he gave emphasis to hitva mam padam. So hitva means to give something up. So in the English it says, the Brahmin continued, "My dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world." So the backdrop here, first of all, is this is all part of the narration of Narada Muni's discussion with Maharaj Prachinabhari. And in order to explain what is the science of the soul, Atma Tattva, to Maharaj Prachinabhari, he gave a narration of a story with a allegorical personality named Puranjan, right? Purajan. Purajan really means a person residing in a city. So this Purajan was a person residing in the city of 9 gates, which represents the senses, etc., etc. So you can reference this in the 4th canto in the story of Narada Muni's Samvad, or discussion with Maharaj Prachinabhari, and the story of Puranjana. So, here the Brahmin is allegorically represented as actually Bhagavan, because in the narration of the story, actually Puranjan comes to the point of his death, but having been absorbed in thinking of his wife, he took birth in a female body. In that female body, again, he becomes married, and then the husband of that female now dies, and in great distress, that female is lamenting. This Brahmin appears before the female, who's the reincarnation of Puranjan, and again reiterates and explains the science of Atma Tattva. As part of that explanation, it has come to this point where the Brahmin, who is Sri Krishna himself in disguise, allegorically speaking here, has spoken to the now allegorical person Puranjana, who's now become a woman, and told, listen, previously, and this is the point he's making, previously we were together. You don't remember me, right? But you were my very intimate friend, but you gave me up. Hitva mampadam. You gave me up to come to the material world. So he has cited this as evidence that the Jiva was in a relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world, whether it be Vaikuntha, Ayodhya, Brajadam, anywhere, and they gave up that relationship and came to the material world. Right? So that's the sastric evidence given. Now I'll go on to read, because it would be unfair if I did not also read. Let me do this. If I did not also read some of Srila Prabhupada's commentary. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up in the actual verses and so forth and give some of Srila Prabhupada's purport here. So I quoted the verse in English already. So then he says, Srila Prabhupada quotes from Bhagavad Gita 7:27, Icha dvesha shamutittvena dhanvamahena bharata savabhutani samoham sagayanti purantapa. O Scion of Bharat, O conqueror foe of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. Now Srila Prabhupada goes on to explain about the nature of samsara, the Jivas, how they're expansions of Krishna, they're called Vivinamsa, etc. Then he quotes the verse of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna Bahir Mukhana Bhoga Vanchakari, Nikatasna Maya Tare Japati Adari. And so Srila Prabhupada gives then, related to the ontological presentation, the allegorical presentation, Srila Prabhupada then describes the ontological reality of the nature of the soul in relation to Krishna. So he says the natural position of the living entity is to serve the Lord in a transcendental loving attitude. When the living entity wants to become Krishna himself, or to imitate Krishna, he falls down into the material world. So now you have both the verse, and you have Srila Prabhupada speaking here in language that appears to completely support exactly what that person who gave the class is espousing. Literally. Since Krishna is the Supreme Father, his affection for the living entity is eternal. When the living entity falls down into the material world, the Supreme Lord, through his Swangsa expansion, meaning the Paramatma, or Antaryami, keeps company with the living entity even in the material world. Then Srila Prabhupada goes on to describe again the misuse of the independence of the living entities, by that misuse is why they fall down into the material world. So far, according to the purport, according to the verse, what the person was espousing seems to be spot on. And if you read this, right, just reading this verse and the following verse I'll read, it seems like you have a complete package of evidence, both by Sastric verse and by the commentary of our Srila Prabhupada. So, in fact, let me go straight on to the next verse from there. So in the next verse, I won't quote the Sanskrit, but he goes on to say, "My dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like a manasa. Manasa means like a lake, like a mental lake, so to speak. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. Oh, this seems to build the case even further, that both Krishna and the living entity, and Krishna's form is super soul, along with that living entity who's now left the spiritual world, it still has not mentioned any genesis of why, except that the living entity has free will, right? But no other reasoning, like what happened? Why did you misuse your free will? None of that has been mentioned, right? But anyway, he goes on to say that now we've come very far away from our original home, which is the spiritual world. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The original home of the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, both the Lord and the living entities live together very peacefully. Since the living entity remains engaged in the service of the Lord, they both share blissful life in the spiritual world. However, when the living entity wants to enjoy himself, he falls down into the material world. But even while he's in that position, the Lord remains with him as the super soul. So in this way, Srila Prabhupada goes on to give ontological explanations in support of the allegorical statements mentioned in the verses. So ontology, first of all, let's clear what ontology is. Ontology is the study of the nature of something. So Srila Prabhupada's descriptions here are a study of the ontological reality of the jiva. What is the ontological reality of the jiva? Jivera sarupoye Krishna nitya das. Dasabhuti hari eva nanyasha eva kadachana. That by constitution, by ultimate reality, we are the servants of Krishna and we have an eternal relationship with Krishna. That is the constitutional reality. And it is the ontological reality. Whether or not there is a history of the jiva falling from the spiritual world to the material world has not been established on the basis of that ontology. That is just a description of the nature of the jiva and the nature of Bhagavan. It is not a history. It's an ontology speaking to the nature of what is the soul and what is God. It's not a history that the jiva is actually fallen from the spiritual world at some point in time. But Mukunda, apparently in these two verses, that point was made clear that they did fall. Let's go back and take a look again. Give me a second. So now we've quoted those two verses which the person has used as praman. Right? So now let's look at the very concluding verse in that chapter. In the concluding verse of that chapter, Srila Prabhupada will give a purport, but first let's quote the verse. Swatam vihaya mam bhando gato brahmya matir mahim vicharan padam adrakshahi kyayanchin nirmitam striya. My dear friend, you are now my same friend. Since you left me, you've become more and more materialistic, and not seeing me, you've been traveling in different forms throughout the material world, which was created by some woman. So here, actually, this is not the verse I was referencing, but actually, Srila Prabhupada here is continuing with an ontological description. He first describes that the living entity in the material world sojourns from one life to another in different forms. And he says that this material world is created by some woman. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada will describe that he's talking about Bhagavan Shakti or Maya Devi. So that's the reference here. All right, hold on 1 second. Let me go back. Give me 1 second here. Oh, here we go. Now, the actual very last verse in that chapter is going to be Srimad Bhagavatam 4:28-65. Now Srila Prabhupada begins to bring home the context for which he was speaking, that ontology that I told you about, and he gives perspective to those verses spoken by Nard to Maharaj Prachinabhati, or in the story, the allegorical story, the section that they're in of, quote, the Brahmin who is Krishna in disguise and the woman who was formerly Puranjana. So now he's going to give context to that. So he says, Borishmane tat adyatman prokshena pradarshitam yat paroksha priyodevo. So this is very important. Paroksh means like to give an indirect description of something. And it's described yat paroksha priyodevo. Right? Krishna particularly likes to hear, or God particularly likes to hear descriptions of his glory in Parokshvad. Parokshvad means in sort of indirect descriptions. Like if you will say that Krishna's face resembles the moon and his eyes resemble lotuses, right? So this way you're describing the facial features of Krishna, but using comparisons to other things. So you're giving an indirect description. You're not looking at Krishna's face, right, and directly describing, right? Of course, in a spiritual way, Krishna's face is so beautiful, there are no descriptions. So automatically it inspires kavya or poetry to come from the heart. But descriptions that are given of Krishna's face is like the moon. His eyes are like lotuses. So this kind of indirect descriptions in the way of describing things is very pleasing to Krishna, even in the manner of speaking about tattva. So he says here, Ya Paroksha Priyo Devo, because it is very pleasing to Krishna to speak in this indirect way, then Narada Muni spoke to Maharaj Prachinabhati the science of Atma Tattva in this indirect way. So the English of that verse is, my dear King Prachinabhati, the Supreme Personality of God, because now we've come all the way back to the beginning of the story. Nard spoke the whole story of Puranjana to Maharaj Prachinabhati. Now we're right back where Nard is speaking to Maharaj Prachinabhati, and he tells him, my dear King Prachinabhati, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes, is celebrated to be known indirectly. Thus I have described the story of Puranjana to you. Actually, it is an instruction for self-realization. It is not a history. You understand? It is not a history. It is an indirect description, right, given to teach Atma Tattva to Maharaj Prachinabhati. He says so directly right here. You understand? Actually, it is an instruction for self-realization. Now, what is our Srila Prabhupada's purport on that? There are many similar stories in the Puranas for self-realization. As stated in the Vedas, Paroksha Priya Eva Hi Devaha. There are many stories in the Puranas that are intended to interest ordinary men in transcendental subjects. But actually, sometimes they have a reference to real facts. They're not historical real facts. Indirectly, they make a reference to a real fact. What is the real fact that's being referred to here? That the Jivas have a relationship with Bhagavan, and they're meant to eternally serve Bhagavan. But it's not a reference to a fact that the Jivas fell from the spiritual world. And as we go on, that is going to become crystal clear. Let me pick up where I left off. Oh, they are not to be considered stories without a purpose. Some of them refer to historical facts, not this one. Like you can have stories like about, let me see, like the story of Anusuya, the wife of Atri Rishi, and how the demigods came to her, and in her chastity, to prove her chastity, she did certain things. So there are certain things which are narrations, but they're actually historical facts. So the question is this a historical fact or not? That's our question. That's what we're looking for. Is this a historical fact, or was this a narration just to teach the point of self-realization? One should be interested, however, in the real purport of the story. Whether it's a historical fact or not, we want the purport. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is saying here. Indirect instruction is quickly understandable for a common man. Factually, the path of Bhakti Yoga is the path of hearing directly about the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. But those who have not yet developed interest in hearing directly about the activities of the Lord and who cannot understand them can effectively hear such stories and fables. Listen to the purport of Srila Prabhupada. Such stories and fables as this one narrated by Narada Muni. Okay? Let's keep going. In the very next verse, in a second, which is going to be the very first verse of chapter 29. So it's going to be 4:29, verse 1. I'll just read the English. King Prachinabhari replied, "My dear Lord," speaking to Narada Muni here, right? He's addressing Narada Muni, "My dear Lord," right? "We could not appreciate completely the purport of your allegorical story of King Puranjana." Let me repeat that again. King Prachinabhari replied to Narada Muni, "We could not appreciate completely the purport of your allegorical story of King Puranjana. Actually, those who are perfect in spiritual knowledge can understand. But for us, who are overly attached to fruitive activities, to realize the purpose of your story is very difficult." So here is the key word. Maharaj Prachinabhari is now telling Narada Muni, because we have some involvement in material life, even though you took the absolute truth and made a indirect description through the narrative of a story, an allegorical story, I still didn't catch it fully. Right? Then Srila Prabhupada's purport. Deluded by he quotes the verse from Bhagavad Gita, Tribhir Gunamaye Bhavir, etc. Deluded by the three modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. Generally, people are enchanted by the three modes of material nature and therefore practically unable to understand that behind all materialist activities in the cosmic manifestation is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Generally, when people are engaged in sinful or even pious activities, they are not perfect in knowledge of devotional service. Listen carefully. This is Srila Prabhupada's purport. Listen carefully. The allegorical, let me go over that again. The allegorical story narrated by Narada Muni to King Bharishman, who's the same as Maharaj Prachinabhari, is especially meant to engage conditioned souls in devotional service. So what is the purport of telling an allegorical story? Excuse me. What is the purport in telling an allegorical story? To get people to engage in devotional service. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada has just now established that the precedent of using allegory or narrative to help people engage in devotional service prior to their maturation to understand Siddhanta and the truth, it is fine to use allegory. But he's clear that this is not a history and this is not a Siddhanta. It is an allegory to help Maharaj Prachinabhari understand what is Atma Tattva or Jiva Tattva. Let me go on. The entire story narrated allegorically, he again emphasizes, is easily understood by persons in devotional service. So those who are actually practicing bhakti, they can understand the intention, purpose, and nature of this allegorical story. They understand it to be an allegory, to teach Atma Tattva. They don't accept it as a siddhant on the history of the jiva. But those who engage in devotional service, let me see. The entire story is narrated allegorically. It is easily understood by persons engaged in devotional service. But those who are engaged not in devotional service, but in sense gratification, cannot perfectly understand it. This is admitted by Maharaj Prachinabhari. So Srila Prabhupada is admitting that even when you tell somebody allegorically or by narrative, they still may not catch on if they have not come under the shelter of devotional service. Now, let's take that as a part one, right? Because now I still would have to establish that the thousands of followers and disciples of Srila Prabhupada who don't accept we fell from the spiritual world, they also need some praman for this. So there's an unlimited praman, but I'm going to go and give a couple of very important references that anyone can look up. So in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? I did not put those numbers down, did I? Anyway, I will look up those numbers right after this and I'll give them to you. I think it is 7:1, perhaps 34 and 35. 7:1, 34 and 35. But let me go through the verses. When Narada Muni was speaking to Maharaj Yudhisthira, and he was describing the fall of Jai and Vijay, when he explained to Yudhisthira Maharaj that they had been cursed by the 4 Kumaras and that they fell from Vaikuntha, this was the response of Yudhisthira Maharaj. Shri Yudhisthira Vacha, Kitrasaha Kasya Swasa Va Swapo. Kitrasa means how, or an attempt to understand something. Kitrasaha Kasya, how is it possible? Va Sap, Sap means a curse. How is it possible that any kind of verse, or what kind of curse is really the question he's asking? What kind of curse, Haridasa Abhimashanaha, can curse those who are Haridasas, eternal associates of Bhagavan? What kind of curse can affect them? Asradeya Ivavati, Hariyakantinam Bhavaha. Those who are kantik in their Haribhav, their Haribhakti, there is no curse that can affect them. So Yudhisthira Maharaj tells even Narada Muni. So this is a very important point, because sometimes we accept things because we look at someone as an authority. And because they have a social position as an authority, we accept what they say and we feel a certain timidness to challenge that. But here, Maharaj Yudhisthira, who's the emblem of proper dharma, understanding the glory of Narada Muni, still when he heard Narada Muni say something that didn't align with Sastric principle, he said, Asradeya eva bhakti. Certainly I cannot accept this. Right? Asradeya. This is incredible. I can't accept this. Right? I'll read the English here, the Srila Prabhupada translation. Maharaj Yudhisthira, what kind of great curse could affect even liberated Vishnu Bhaktas? What sort of person could curse even the Lord's associates? For unflinching devotees of the Lord to fall again to this material world is impossible. Srila Prabhupada translate, I cannot believe this. Now, I'm going to give you the explanation that the person who espouses that we do fall gave for this statement in the 7th canto. He's saying that the meaning here is that Maharaj Yudhisthira could not believe that those who want to stay there don't fall, and they were forced to fall. So now the question is, we'd have to find some evidence of a commentary besides that personal understanding that validates that that's what this means. If this is what Srila Prabhupada meant, it certainly will be in his purport. That what this means is that those who don't want to fall, don't fall. And that Maharaj Yudhisthira was saying, for those who don't want to fall or want to stay, for them to be cursed to fall is what he could not believe. That's what the person who's espousing we fell, that's the logic they're giving. But that should also be Srila Prabhupada's view on this. Or there should be a commentary of any of our Puravacharyas stating that. But Maharaj Yudhisthira is clear that those who have a kantik bhakti towards Bhagavan, who are eternal associates of Bhagavan, cannot fall from the spiritual world. That's Maharaj Yudhisthira's perspective. And therefore he tells even Narada Muni, I can't accept this, I can't believe it. He doesn't give any rationale neither did Narada Muni, that, well, he's actually speaking really only to the case of Jai and Vijay because they didn't want to fall, so it was incredible that they fell. He's saying no eternal associates can fall from the spiritual world. So let me go on. Let me go into purport. In Bhagavad Gita 8:16, the Lord clearly states, one who is purified of material contamination and returns home back to Godhead does not return to this material world. So now you could give the argument, well, that's after having come to the material world and return, quote, to the spiritual world, one never falls. But now let's go on with the purport and we'll see how that makes sense. They do not return to the material world. Elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Janma kama chame divyam evam yogati tattva takum deham pranajanma naiti mamati sojan. One who knows my transcendental nature of appearance and activities is not upon leaving the body again. So here, there's a similar statement that once having gone there, one does not come back. But the question is, what is it that makes someone go there and not come back? What is it that they have that doesn't allow them to again fall to the material world? And would it not be the same thing that is possessed by those who already inhabit the spiritual world? So now the question is, what is it that the eternal associates of Bhagavan have? It is called Swarup Shakti. Swarup Shakti means the internal potency or spiritual energy. Because that spiritual energy is one with every Atma of the spiritual world, they all experience what is called the Ladini potency or the bliss potency. That bliss potency is all consuming. And therefore there is no opportunity for anything to present itself as superior to the taste of that Ladini Shakti. That's why Maharaj Yudhisthira said that those who are Hari Akantinam Bhavaha, that those who have ekantic mood towards Krishna, for them Bhavaha, to take birth again in the material world, he can't believe it, he can't accept it. That no eternal associates can fall. Then he says, listen, Teyendri Shuhinam Vaikuntha Pura Vashinam. Those who are Vaikuntha Vasis, who live in the eternal spiritual world, they are Indriyeshu Ahinam. They don't have material inebrities or contaminations in their form. So from where would material contamination have arisen to cause a fall from the spiritual world? Not to mention, Srimad Bhagavatam in the very first verse establishes that the spiritual world is ever free from any kind of illusion. So the fact that there's no illusion or Maya in the spiritual world, secondly, the composition of the forms in the spiritual world also are completely free from any material inebriety. What is the genesis that could make someone fall from there? Deha sambandham etat akyatum arasi. So he says, Deha sambandham. Let me read this again. Deha sambandha, in the material body, sambandham, bondage, etat, this, akyatum arasi. Please describe. So then here's the translation about Srila Prabhupada. The bodies of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are completely spiritual, having nothing to do with the material body, senses, or life here. Therefore, kindly explain how associates of the personality of Godhead were cursed to descend in material bodies like ordinary persons. So Yudhisthira now gives opportunity to Narada Muni to describe the nature of the Leela of Jai and Vijay. He's established, don't tell me that it is ordinarily possible for Jivas to fall out of the spiritual world who are eternal associates of Bhagavan. He's not willing to accept that. But he's giving room. Yes, perhaps there is a reasoning regarding Bhagavan himself which would accommodate how an eternal associate comes to the material world. The ever-important purport of our Srila Prabhupada. The significant question would be difficult for an ordinary person to answer. But Narada Muni, being an authority, could answer it. Therefore Maharaj Yudhishthira inquired from him, saying, Etat Aptitu Marasi, only you would be able to explain the reason. From authoritative sources, it can be discerned. Srila Prabhupada is saying, from all authoritative sources, it can be ascertained, or discerned, that associates of Lord Vishnu who descend from the Vaikuntha do not actually fall. Maybe I'll repeat that 50 times, right? It can be discerned from authoritative sources, which means all the writing of our Purvacharyas, all of the Sastra Brahman, etc., including our Srila Prabhupada. It can be discerned from the authoritative sources that associates of Lord Vishnu, what to speak of Lord Krishna, Lord Ram, or any other manifestation of Bhagavan in their abode, it can be discerned that the associates of Lord Vishnu who descend from Vaikuntha do not actually fall. They come with a purpose of fulfilling the desire of the Lord, and their descent to this material world is comparable to that of the Lord. So if you suggest that Jivas fall from the spiritual world, Srila Prabhupada is equating that with suggesting that Bhagavan himself can fall out of the spiritual sky. Let me say it. I'm not saying, Srila Prabhupada is saying. They come with a purpose of fulfilling the desire of the Lord, and their descent to the material world is comparable to that of the Lord. The Lord performs so many leelas coming to the material world. It is a leela. It is not a fall. Unless we start down the completely opposite Dantic track, that actually we are all here because we're performing a leela. So then we can double down on the opposite Dantic idea by saying, yes, I'm here and I've gone through the entire material spectrum of life because this is my leela. So you can say like that. My suggestion would be to sit down and chant innumerable rounds and pray for mercy that some light should shine in your mind. Okay. Let me go on with Srila Prabhupada's purport. And forgive me for being animated, but I think because of the danger in presenting something and presenting it in a way that excludes the possibility that other disciples and followers of Srila Prabhupada don't have your conclusion, and therefore they're outside the scope of being true disciples and followers of Srila Prabhupada. All right? The Lord comes to the material world through the agency of his internal potency, and similarly, when a devotee or associate of the Lord descends to the material world, he does so through the action of the spiritual energy or Yog Maya, not Mahamaya, Yog Maya. Any pastimes conducted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead is an arrangement of Yoga Maya, not Mahamaya. It is an arrangement of Yoga Maya, not Mahamaya. It is an arrangement of Yoga Maya, not Mahamaya. Therefore, it is to be understood that when Jai and Vijay descend to this material world, they came because there was something to be done for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Major statement. Flash bulletin. I don't have any sound effects to do it with. Otherwise, it is a fact. Otherwise, it is a fact that no one falls from Vaikuntha. Otherwise, it is a fact that no one falls from Vaikuntha. So here Srila Prabhupada has put to rest any misconceptions that may have arisen from allegory, from ontology. He's clear that unless there's something to be done for Bhagavan, to come from Vaikuntha or any of the spiritual planets must be part of the Lord's Leela, and hence a feature of Yoga Maya. It is not a feature of Mahamaya in which the Jivas find themselves in this material world. So to suggest that the Jivas were originally in the spiritual world and somehow Maya entered there, or that their spiritual bodies in the spiritual world were infused with some aspect of Mahamaya, is all not sastrically or by our Purvacharyas condoned anywhere. And that's why I said the first red flag should have been quoting 2 verses out of 18,000 to prove a point. Now, what I'm going to do as a helpmate to this discussion is I'm going to copy and put in the commentary the innumerable praman refuting the idea that the jiva can fall from the spiritual world given by all of our acharyas, including Srila Prabhupada. Now, Srila Prabhupada quotes one more thing from Krishna Sandarbha. And also, there must be other authorities, but he says, from authoritative sources, I know it's in Krishna Sandarbha, it is learned that Jaya and Vijaya was sent to the material world to fulfill the Lord's desire to fight. So in Krishna Sandarbha, one verse is there, Jaya Vijaya Sanak Adi Sap Vyajema. That the curse of the 4 Kumaras, Vyajema means like a pretense. So it was a lila, it was a pretense to allow the pastime of the Lord to taste Vira Ras, means the Ras of chivalry. By fighting in 3 different incarnations as Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakasipu, Rav and Kumbhakana, Sishupal, Damtabaka. Right? So other than that, no one can fall from Vaikuntha. So I gave now the Sastra Praman for the fact that no one can fall, and I have put into context the allegorical and ontological statements presented in that 4th canto regarding the idea that someone may glean that we fall. And I've clearly given Srila Prabhupada's own opinion on this, and Srila Prabhupada has not given another opinion. He's not described anything about, well, this only refers to those who want to stay, others who wanted to leave by their free will could leave, etc., etc. He's cleared this siddhant, that in terms of Vaikuntha, no one can fall from there. Now, as a further praman, you can look at 11th canto, chapter 22, verse number 10. And that describes clearly the genesis of the jiva in the material world. Anadi avijja yuktasha purushasha veda atmanam. Swatona sambhavantiyanya gyanatva ganado bhavet. The jiva sojourn in this material world is anadi. Now, you can go through several iterations in your mind of what anadi means. Well, time immemorial, time before we could remember, etc., etc. But Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhupada has described it as no beginning, anadi. So unless you have something beyond the conceptions of Jiva Goswami Prabhupada, or you have contextually some reason to make up something beyond that, we can accept that it means anadikal. Time without any beginning. And you can also say that, okay, even if I can't remember it, that doesn't immediately indicate a whole set of activities prior to that anadi. Because he's describing the yukta of the jiva, and the external energy has been anadi. And when they come in contact with bhakti, that becomes the genesis of their sojourn towards establishing the constitutional relationship with Krishna. My wife is asking a question. She's sitting here listening. Yukta means connected to something. All right, so hopefully this helped. And as I said, I'll put in the comments here a series of evidences from both the Purvacharyas and Srila Prabhupada regarding the nature of the infallibility for one of jivas in the spiritual world and their inability to fall. The fact that if you say they misused their independence, there had to be a genesis of a reason. Either they found something more attractive, or they became it. Whatever it might be, there had to be some genesis, right? But according to all indications from all Purva Acharyas and all Sastra, there is nothing that can break the relationship with the jiva in the spiritual world. One devotee, he made an attempt to bring that point up in the class. I heard him quote the verse of Srila Rupa Goswami Pad, Savata Dongsa Yadapi Dongsa Karane, Yad Bhava Bandhano Yuno Prema Parikirtita. So, you can take different iterations of this verse, but if you look at Rupa Goswami's definition, that will take precedence. All right, my Dandavat Pranam, and hopefully people are not pinched or disturbed by my animation. And of course, my animation is not at all related to any individual or anything like that, because I have great respect for anybody who is traversing this path of bhakti. It is very rare, and for anybody to come to the service of our Srila Prabhupada or any of our Guru Vargas, I consider to be very highly esteemed. But in the social fabric of the Gaudiya Mandal or of our Vaishnava Mandal, certainly there will be instances where there will be Siddhantic disagreements. Because the theology of bhakti is huge. You understand? So, but the point being that we cannot use the backdrop of our acharyas, Srila Prabhupada, or any of our Guru Vargas, as a shield against anyone else's understanding except our own. Okay? So what I really took maybe umbrage to more than anything is the idea that anyone who doesn't follow their vision of this is outside the scope of being a sincere disciple or follower of our Srila Prabhupada. Right, my Dandavat Pranam devotees, Vanchakal Putruvishya, Kripasindavevacha, Patitanam Pavanevyo, Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. Again, look in the comments, I'll post those Siddhantic refutations. Jai Radhe Radhe.